Today, I'm going to show you how to make a simple calculator in Python. This calculator is going to be able to perform 8 different operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, exponentiation, finding the remainder, factorial, and square root. Also, we won't be using any external libraries in order for this program to work. So now let's start coding. First, I'm going to start with creating all the functions that we'll be using. So let's start with addition, def add. We don't need any parameters because we're going to ask for the input in the function itself. So let's first print that we're adding so the user knows what they're doing. Then we need our first number, and this will be equal to a float value of an input, and we'll do enter first number. And the reason it's a float is in case the user wants to add a decimal value, so we can, accommodate for that. And we also need the second number, and it's just going to be the same thing. So we'll just change num1 to num2, and enter first number will become enter second number. Alright, and our answer is going to be equal to num1 plus num2. And now all we have to do is return this value. So we'll return, and what we'll return is we'll return the string that will contain the output that our computer will show, or our program will show. And so I'll do that using an f string. So f quote, we'll just do num1 plus num2 equals answer. And for those of you who don't know what an f string is, it's basically an easy way Python allows us to combine variable values and put them into a string. So let's say our num1 had a value of 1 and num2 had a value of 2. In that case, our answer would be 3. So this would return a string that says 1 plus 2 equals 3. Alright, now let's move on to our next function. We'll do subtraction now. So def subtract. And again, we'll be doing something very similar to add. So I'm just going to copy what we did up there, paste. First, we'll change print this to subtracting. And then enter first number, enter second number. Answer here, it will be minus num2 in this case. And our f string will also change this to, it will return num1 minus num2 equals answer. Alright, now let's move on to multiplication. Def multiply. And our first 4 functions, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, are going to be very similar to one another. So I'm just going to copy and paste this again. Change this to multiplying. Enter first number, second number, and here instead of this, we'll do our star. And here I'll do our star again, so they know it's being multiplied. And by they, I mean the user. Now let's do division. Def divide. Again, I'm just going to do the same thing. It's a lot easier. Dividing. Enter first number, second number. In this case, I might even change this to enter dividend and a divisor. So that way the user knows which one to enter first. And here for the answer, I'm just going to change it to our slash. And before we actually calculate the answer, we want to make sure that num2 value is not 0. because if you can't multiply anything by 0, that returns an undefined value. So if num2 is 0, we'll return error, cannot divide by 0, and it will say undefined. And then if all that's good, we'll just do num1, and this time I'll say divided by num2 equals our answer. And the reason I'm not doing an else statement here, if else, is because if this runs and our function returns this value, when a function returns a value, it automatically stops, and so everything down here will not run. So we can leave it like that and it will work perfectly fine. Now let's move on to our next operator, which will be the exponent. So def exponent. And what we'll do is we'll first print exponent. And this should be in quotes. And what we'll do is num1 equals float input. I could copy and paste for this one too, but we're already this far, so I'll do enter base number. And the next num2, or on a new line, float input enter exponent value. Alright, and to do an exponent in Python, it will be num1 and then a double star num2. This is how you do exponents in Python. And here what we'll do is we'll return again another f string, num, or in curly brackets, num1 to the power of curly brackets num2 is, and then answer. Alright. Next we have our remainder function. So def remainder. And this is often called the modulus operator. And again, I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'll do finding the remainder. Alright, so again with this, remainder and modulus is more dividing. So I'm going to copy what I did up here and doing the dividend and divisor. So enter dividend and the divisor, and we don't really need to add number at the end. Alright, and we also, again, because this is dividing, we do want to check if this is 0. So I'm just going to copy this if statement and put it down here. And instead of just normally dividing it, we're going to use the modulus operator, which is the percent symbol. And in our return function, I'm going to do the remainder of this num1 value divided by num2 value is the answer that we got. And so what this modulus operator does here is it finds the remainder after dividing the two numbers. Alright, now let's move on to factorial. Def factorial. I would definitely say this is the most complex operator in this calculator, but it's not that bad. So first we'll print again that finding, or we'll just do factorial, And then what we want to do is num, and this time we only need one variable because it's not really an operation you do with two variables. It's just like, for example, if you enter 5, that will be 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, and that would be the factorial. So num would just be int input and then enter number. And this time we need it to be an integer. So let's check for that. So up here, we'll first set it to float, just so no error is caused in case the user sends an integer. But then if num is less than 0, and again, you can only do factorials with positive integers. If num is less than 0 or it's not an integer, so you can't perform this integer function with num. And what this integer function does, this int, it converts this num value to an integer. Let's say it was a 14.0, it would just convert it to 14. And let's also specify up here, we'll enter an integer. And let's specify positive integer just in case. And if it's none of these values, we can return our error, or spell that right, factorial only works with positive integers. Alright, and then we also want to check that if num is 0, then we don't really have to do any operations and we can just return 0. And we also need to do this because with the factorial model I'm going to be using, it's going to be a little different. So here we'll do, and here we'll have to do else, just because we're not returning a value here. Or actually we can return a value here, so yeah, we don't need this else here. Well, let's do that. Is 0, and we want to check for this because the factorial of 0 is just 0, so we don't really need to do any further calculations. So we'll return another f string, and we'll do the factorial of 0 is 0. Or we don't even need an f string for this, but yeah. Alright, and then finally we'll do our actual operation. So our answer, we'll set it to 1 by default. And this is also another reason that we have to check if it's 0 or not. It doesn't really work with 0, so you have to pre-check if it's 0. And so we have to start with 1. If we set the answer to 0 and we multiply it by our next number, then the answer at the result will just be 0 and it won't work. So we have to set it to 1 to start off with. So for I in range 1 to num plus 1. Because here, if we just did 1 to num, it won't actually include this num value. So if num was 5, then it would do 1, 2, 3, 4, and it won't include 5. So that's why we have to add 1 for it to become 6, and it does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's a situation in where num is equal to 5, but this works with all numbers. And so what we want to do is we want to do answer times equals I, which is our variable here, and this will change from 1 through whatever num is. And so what this times equals does is it's basically the same as doing answer is equal to the previous answer times I. So this will change the value of our answer variable, and it will change it to what the previous answer was times I, and the shortcut of writing that is just times equals I. And you can do plus equals, minus equals, and basically whichever operator you want. And then at the end of this, we'll return f-string, the factorial of curly brackets num is curly brackets answer. Alright, and that leaves us with one last operator, and that is square root. So def square root. And here what we'll do is, again, we'll print finding square root, and we'll ask for the input. So num it equals int input enter squared number. And again, we only need one input value for this, because you can only square one number at a time, or find the square root of one number at a time. So what we'll do is we also need to check that if num is less than 0. Oh, and also this can be a float. Yeah, so if num is less than 0, we need to check for this, because you cannot find, there's no square root for negative values, because you can't multiply the same number by itself. Negative times negative is going to be a positive number, and positive times positive is going to be a positive number. So you can't square something and get a negative number. So it's impossible to find the square root of a negative number. So if the number entered is negative, we'll return our error and cannot take square root of a negative number. Alright, and now we can move on. So our answer, assuming this is now a variable we can work with, equals num. And to get the square root, all you have to do is set the exponent to 0.5. And that's basically the same thing as taking the square root of something. Once we do that, we can return our final value. That's an f-string, the square root of curly brackets num is curly brackets answer. And so that's all our 8 functions. We can get into the actual program where we run these functions. So here we'll do a while true loop. And in this while true loop is going to be the calculator running over and over again. And so we want to print all the options that the user has. So we'll do print and first we'll set the title, so which is simple terminal calculator, and I'm just gonna add some equal signs to make it look cool, and it's like a banner. And then now we need to print the actual options. So print 1 can be add or addition, and then print 2 can be subtract, and so on for the rest of them. Alright, so that's all the options, and at the end I'm gonna do again the equal signs, and I'll do 40 of them to separate this from where the user will be typing. And so first we need to ask for an input for which operation the user wants to do. And here we see we have 8 options. So we'll do operator is equal to input, and then which operation would you like to conduct? And we'll give them the options 1 through 8. And before we actually do this, I'm going to create a dictionary where each one of these numbers, 1 through 8, corresponds to each function that we created. So up here above the while true loop, I'll create a dictionary called operations. And this will be a dictionary where I'll do the string 1, because when the user passes in a value into an input, it's automatically a string. So we'll keep it as a string in here. This will correspond to our add function. 2 will be our subtract function, and so on. Alright, so now that we have all the functions and their corresponding numbers, here when we ask for the input, now we can actually work with now we can actually do the operation that our user wants to do. So what we'll do is, and before we can actually do the operation, we have to check if the user entered a valid option or a valid number. So we'll do if int operator is less than 1 or int operator is greater than 8. And the reason we're doing an int is, like I said earlier, when a user passes in a value through the input function, it's automatically stored as a string, so we need to convert it to an int. And what we'll do here is we'll print our error, enter an integer value between 1 through 8. And then if that doesn't happen, and if everything works fine, what we'll do is operation, we'll create a new variable, and this will be equal to the operations dictionary. And from that, we want to find the operator that we are going to use. And we need to actually call this function so it actually runs. So we'll add parentheses back here so the function will actually run. And the output of this here is going to be the return value that we set for each of the functions. And at the end, we'll just print our operation. And actually, instead of calling this operation, a better variable name would be answer. So yeah, answer. Now this works here, but we need a way for the user to exit out of the function. And what we'll do is we'll set a variable called resume, and we'll set it equal to an input. And what we'll ask the user is, would you like to continue? And what we'll do is yes or no, just Y or N. And what we'll do is if resume equals N, and we can also do or capital N. But yeah, if that's true, what we'll do is break. But if they type yes and they want to continue, we will just go right back up to the top here, and it will print it again, and the user will be able to do their functions. So now let's give this a test run. All right, we can see here that it's asking us for which operation we like to conduct, 1 through 8. And let's do addition, 1. Oh, and there's a problem. And this is on line 97. If int operations is less than 1. Oh, and this shouldn't be operations. It should be operator. That's a typo. So now let's try running this again and hopefully it works. 1. Adding, enter first number. Let's do 6. Second number 7. And here, 6 plus 7 equals 13. Would I like to continue? I'm going to do one more time, so y. Oh, and it ended for some reason. And I think I know why that is. It's because here when we check if resume equals quote n or capital N, that's not exactly how Python works. We need to do resume equals n. We need to do this whole thing again in order for Python to actually understand what we're asking it, because or just n, that doesn't really mean anything. So this way it will just break at all times. So now if we run this program, it asks which operation. Let's do 2 this time, subtraction, 6, 7, and it shows -1. Let's continue. Let's try factorial, 7, enter a positive integer. Oh, and I didn't format this right, but you guys at home can do that correctly. 5, and we get another error. And float object cannot be interpreted as an integer. This makes sense because here we checked if it was a num, but we entered it back in as a float. Here, instead of just float, we'll just do int. And here, we'll get rid of this checking for int. So now, hopefully, when we run this should work fine. Go back to factorial, 5, and it gives us 120, which is 120. Alright, and now this time, let's just do n, and it stops the program. So that is the complete calculator program. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you want to learn how you can create games using Python, then please watch this video over here.